And welcome to our second small business webinar in the Modest Means Helpline's Small Business Webinar Series. Our presentation today is Forming a New Mexico LLC Online. My name is Brecken Larson, and I'm a staff attorney with the Modest Means Helpline. The Modest Means Helpline is a civil legal telephone helpline operated by the New Mexico State Bar Foundation. The Modest Means Helpline assists New Mexico residents with incomes below 500% of federal poverty guidelines. The Modest Means Helpline can assist in civil matters, including but not limited to small business issues. And the Modest Means Helpline's two staff attorneys provide legal advice over the phone, and if appropriate, may refer the case to volunteer attorneys for representation, ranging from pro bono legal advice to limited or full representation. You can call the helpline at 505-797-6013, and we keep the helpline open Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. This presentation provides attendees and viewers with general legal information. The presenters are not providing legal advice and are not entering into any attorney-client relationship with any attendees or viewers of this webinar. We will not be discussing specific situations in this webinar, so please refrain from asking fact-specific questions. You can call our helpline with your specific questions after the webinar. The presenters of this webinar are not providing an opinion or advice as to whether an LLC is the right business entity for your specific situation. The information provided in this presentation is for purposes of providing examples only. Attendees and viewers are not authorized or permitted to use any of the contact information shown in this webinar, including but not limited to names of individuals or entities used as examples for organizers, registered agents, or otherwise. Our website, and you can find our previous videos at sbnm.org. And if you click on the For Public tab, and then click on Modest Means Helpline and MMH Publications, you can see here is a link to our last and our first video in this small business webinar series. Another way you can find our video, our last webinar, is if you go to the State Bar of New Mexico's YouTube page, and you can find the first webinar here under Home, the Home tab, or you can click on the Videos tab, and it's also there. And we will post this webinar to those locations as well. In this presentation, we will cover how to form a New Mexico LLC online utilizing the New Mexico Secretary of State's website. We will also provide a brief overview of LLCs and their formation and structure. There are other types of business entities available to operate a business under that we will not be discussing in today's presentation. As noted previously, we are not making the recommendation that you form an LLC or utilize that entity to operate a business. The limited liability company is sometimes referred to in short as the LLC. And currently, in order to operate a limited liability company, you have to form it with the New Mexico Secretary of State. So there's some formality involved there. And the fees and forms required at this time are a filing fee of $50, and that you first file a form, Articles of Organization, with the Secretary of State, and that you also provide a signed registered agent statement, which we will discuss later. And if the Secretary of State finds that you've complied in providing all the information required in Articles of Organization, it will issue a certificate of organization, which will include your business ID number, and you can use that to update further accounts, set up other accounts, update names, etc. Currently, for LLCs in New Mexico, there are no reporting requirements annually, biannually. However, you don't have to make any reports to the Secretary of State. You don't have to upload any of your internal governance documents like an operating agreement. All you have to do is file Articles of Organization and a registered agent statement at this time. And in order to initiate filing Articles of Organization, it's a one-time designation of an individual who acts as the organizer on behalf of the LLC, the person who's authorized to form the LLC. They're designated, or they're referred to as the organizer. Okay. So now we're going to switch over to the Secretary of State's website. And that website it's actually a new website name or a new link. And that is www.sos.nm.gov. And go. So sos.nm.gov in the bar up above is what I have here. And if you hover over online services in the upper right-hand corner along that top bar, you'll click on business portal, which is the first option. And this brings you to a login page. And so what you'll first need to do is create a login up in this right-hand corner by clicking create user account. I'm not going to walk you through how to do that, but that will be your first step if you don't already have a login. You'll log in. The first thing you'll see that pops up once you log in is a notice in yellow trying to get your attention that says, please read before continuing. And it's signaling to you that before you, basically, if you're going to plan to pay by a credit or debit card, you need to replenish your account balance. So you need to prepay, essentially. If you don't do that and you go through this whole software program that creates your articles of organization so that you can form the LLC, you're going to lose all your work because you're going to get all the way to the end and you're not going to have funds to actually pay. And so it's really important that you replenish your account balance, which I'm going to show you how to do right now. You'll click OK to get out of this notice box. So up in the right-hand corner here where it says replenish account balance, you'll click on replenish account. Right now it's showing an account balance of 0. So that can be helpful to know if you have any funds in there. We'll click replenish account, the blue button. And the top box says replenish with desired amount, gives you that option, or replenish using filing fee calculator. Because we know that filing an LLC at this time costs $50, you can put 50 period 00 into the box. They will charge a convenience fee of $1.95 to use this system. So it will essentially be $51.95 to form the LLC. And then you'd click proceed to pay when you were wanting to input your credit card information, your debit or credit card information. And there will be a drop down from the top that will say, confirm, do you want to confirm this payment of $51.95 or confirm this charge? And so you'll want to click OK or continue on that little drop down, but do watch for that to come down from the top. The other way that you can use this now or in the future is if you don't want to use the replenish with a desired amount option, you can click replenish using filing fee calculator. And if you're doing some type of action for an LLC or for another business, you can select from these drop downs what you're doing and it'll calculate the fee for you, but easier and more efficient to use this. Replenish with desired amount, $50, and then proceed to pay. So then when you get done with that, if it doesn't have a done button, then you can click on and you've fully processed your payment, you'll click on the dashboard button, which is the very upper left-hand option in the bar at the top. And that'll take you back to this homepage and show you this notice again, because I didn't actually load funds in. So, and this is where you would be able to confirm in that upper right-hand corner if you had fully replenished your account balance and prepaid. So once you've prepaid, you can move on to actually going in to start the program to form or to draft essentially your articles of organization using the Secretary of State's program. So the first thing you'll do is up in that top brown bar, you'll hover over corporations in the upper left-hand corner. And the third option down says domestic NM LLC formation, and you'll click on that. And it'll bring you to the first module or the first page in this series, and you can follow your progress along the top. Each of these buttons will turn blue as you proceed through the program to create your LLC, your articles. And so the first box, or the first sort of information that you are required to input, is your proposed limited liability company name and any doing business as or DBA names that you plan to use with the LLC. And I have a little bit more information on the PowerPoint about LLC names, because there are some rules under the statutes. So the name of a limited liability company must contain the words limited liability company, the letters capital C, capital C, or capital L period, capital C period. So some examples for you there would be, this is the business name, example, space, capital L, capital C, example, which is the business name, comma, capital L, capital C, or example, comma, L period, C period. For purposes of simplification, and to just sort of keep things as clean as possible, I do recommend that you go with that first example where you don't have any commas or any periods, no characters whatsoever in the LLC name. In the future, when you're updating accounts, or you're signing contracts, or you're getting a business license, it can just simplify everything when you don't have to remember if you have a comma or a period somewhere. Just a tip, but totally your option as to what your preference is there. Another requirement is that the name of a limited liability company must be distinguishable from the name of any other LLC or other corporate entity that exists in New Mexico currently. That also includes foreign LLCs and entities that are authorized to transact business in New Mexico. And it also must be distinguishable from any name that's been reserved, which is something that you can do. You can reserve a name for 120 days with the Secretary of State. So your name has to be distinguishable, and distinguishable doesn't necessarily mean you're not so much concerned about it being the same or an exact match of a name, but something that's similar in look, sound, and meaning to another existing entity or a name that's reserved. So for a doing business as name or a trade name, if you use one, I do recommend that you include it now when you're forming the LLC, that you provide this information to the Secretary of State to avoid having to do it later. So when you're forming it using this online formation program, you'll use a / and then the letters DBA to designate what your DBA actually is. So here's using the example from above. Here's your LLC name, example space LLC. Then you have a space, a / another space, the capital letters DBA, and then whatever entity you do business as. So here I'm saying I'm forming the LLC, example LLC, but I'm planning and I intend to do business as MMH LLC. If you've already formed your LLC and you didn't include what your doing business as name is, then you'll have to file paper articles of amendment with the Secretary of State. So you have to either mail them in or file them in person. It's also a recommended best practice that you search the proposed LLC name and any DBA names that you use or plan to use on the Secretary of State's website ahead of use to avoid a potential dispute. And I'll show you an example of that now, of how you can search outside of the program. You can search within the program, which I'll show you in a second, but I'll show you now how you can search ahead of time using the Secretary of State's website. So going back to the Secretary of State's homepage, you again hover over online services and you click on business portal. But you don't need to log in to use this. This is also a really good example that the information that you input into these online articles of organization, or if you submit it on paper, it is a public record. And so anyone can search any of the information that you input. So if you're trying to sort of maintain some anonymity, there are some ways to essentially include or report or designate the least amount of information to the Secretary of State so that you're meeting all the minimum requirements, but you're still yeah, you're meeting all the minimum requirements, but people in the public can't see all the information. So the very top left box says business search. It says search big business filings and business search in this little kind of maroon area. So if you click on that, there's a search box here that has buttons at the top that says starts with, exact match, or contains. Contains would be the most broad search that you can search. And to give you an example of searching for an entity name and a DBA name, and to look at what I would recommend as a proper format, I'm going to do contains and then just include the letters DBA and then the word festival. This is just for purposes of an example. I don't know any of these people or these LLCs, but this is a good example, I think, for showing formats of business names. Okay, so here we have two search results. One of them is a corporation that you can see. One of them is a limited liability company. But that limited liability company, the second row, is a really good example of how to structure your LLC name and then also how to include and structure your DBA name. So it says Towswools Productions space LLC with a / and then DBA Towswools Festival LLC. And I'll show you in a moment where the Secretary of State notes that when you designate your DBA in their system, you also have to include the letters LLC for any DBA that you're operating. And so sometimes I've seen people, like in this top example, where they'll put in a colon. Again, this is a character, and they are in their corporation name. They have a comma, a period. Then in their DBA, they have a colon. For simplification purposes, you don't need to put the colon. Other times I've seen people use quotation marks. So it'll be like DBA with a space and then an open quote, the name, and then an end quote. You don't need the quotation marks. This bottom example is a great example of how to keep your name and your DBA name really clean and clear. So, and this is just an example too of how you can also pre-search for business names ahead of forming your business, or to see if there are any other businesses who operate using a similar name. And when we say to avoid a potential dispute, that would be an example where if you're doing business as an entity that's really different from the LLC name, but it's similar to another DBA that someone else uses, and say customers or the public are Googling or searching online for using your DBA, or they're looking for the other company's DBA or business, but they're instead being directed to yours. What can happen is that other company could potentially send you like a cease and desist letter to stop using that name, to talk about the interference it may be causing in their business. And so it could sort of interrupt your business operations if you've already invested in marketing materials or otherwise using that DBA name. It's just a really good practice, a recommended best practice, to search both the proposed LLC name and any DBA names that you might be using ahead of formation. Okay, now we're going to go back to the Secretary of State's website, and I will show you. This is still, we're in this first section about formation. So for purposes of an example, I'll put in that example LLC / DBA NMH LLC. And if I click search entities, it's going to say no records to view, which signals to me that there's no one else who's using these names. And this would be potentially a name that wouldn't cause a future dispute. So I'll show you an example that, because you can also use this search entities button and this function to search within the Secretary of State's database. If you're already if you pre-searched or whatever, you can use it here as well. So an example would be ABC LLC. And if I hit the tab button, it populates it below. And if I click search entities, it's going to come up with a lot of records. It's saying there's 218 LLCs or entities that are registered in New Mexico that have those letters ABC in them somewhere. So that's an example of the this search tool that's within the program that can sort of also alert you. Another thing I want to mention, I'm going to go back to this example LLC /MM, DBA, got to include those letters, DBA NMH LLC. And if you have another DBA, what you would do here is add another /. It's on your question mark key on the keyboard, and you do DBA, and then you'd use whatever your other LLC is, for example. So I'm only going to move forward with using one DBA, but you would just continue to create a chain for all your DBAs that you're wanting to register under this main LLC that you're forming now. Okay. So this is the name that I'm going to proceed to form, this example LLC. And once you're done on this page, you click continue. Well, it doesn't want to let me continue here. Try again. If I type everything in or do a search again, maybe that's what I needed to do to prompt it. Oh, maybe not. Okay, I'll do a refresh. I might have to log back in. There we go. This is a really good example too that, you know, this is a bit of a finicky system. And so sometimes knowing the tips and tricks can be the helpful bit. So again, I'm going back up to the top, domestic NM LLC formation. It's another really good indicator that when you're moving in this system, you could essentially lose all your work. And if you use the back button or the refresh button at the top of your internet browser, you're probably going to lose your work. If you use the continue button at the bottom, and then I'll show you on the next screen, there's a back button at the bottom. If you can remember to try to use that, that might be a closer way or a better way to try to avoid losing your work. Okay, that time it took. So, okay. So now it's illuminating this next icon at the top in blue. So you know you're moving forward in this program, the top box. And this page has to do with effective date and purpose and duration of the LLC. So the effective date, it's going to pre-populate with today's date. And you can set it at a date in the future if you have a specific project or something in mind, or you know that that's sort of an aspect of your business. Similarly, for period of duration, perpetual just means that if you form this LLC, it's going to exist until you dissolve it or until you otherwise file something with the Secretary of State that is showing that it's been terminated. But again, if you have a specific project, you can set a really specific period of duration. I would recommend, if that's a way that you're going to be structuring an LLC or using an LLC, that you do seek out further legal advice and tax advice, just to double check that that is how you should be designating your period of duration. The perpetual period of duration gives you a lot of flexibility. So then at the bottom box, that says business purpose, or purpose up at the heading, and then business purpose, it allows you to type in what your business purpose is. And this is not a required, this isn't required information that you provide to the Secretary of State. If you input something into this box, it's going to be available to the public. But on the flip side of that, I've also heard where when people form businesses, they are required to show and prove their business purpose to banks or other institutions. So it may be that if you include your business purpose here, it can meet some other requirement of another, unrelated agency or something, but just know that it's your option. This isn't a required item or information to include in order to form an LLC. So once you're done, you'll click the blue button on the right that says continue, the bottom right. And it brings you to the page about registered agent of the LLC. And so the registered agent, and the purpose of a registered agent, is literally to receive service of process on behalf of the LLC. And service of process would be any documents related to a lawsuit or a court action you're designating an address and contact information so that the court or the opposing party knows how to get in touch properly with the LLC. You can designate an individual resident in New Mexico, a domestic entity that has the same place of business as the LLC, or a foreign entity that's authorized to do business in New Mexico with a place of business that's the same as the LLC. And for the registered agent, you have to provide a street address. A post office box is not acceptable, and it has to be within New Mexico. That's the purpose of the registered agent as well, is that it's a street address within New Mexico. Another recommended best practice is that you keep your registered agent information up to date at all times. We have heard of instances and had clients call in who did not keep their registered agent information updated. There were lawsuits that were carried out against this LLC all the way through without the owners or the members of the LLC having any clue, because all the court and the opposing party were sending all the mail and all the documents to the address properly that was listed for the registered agent. And it even proceeded all the way through a lawsuit into a judgment, into garnishing funds out of a bank account. So this is really important to keep up to date your registered agent information. So now, to designate the registered agent, you can designate again an individual or an entity. And I'm going to click Create Registered Agent to designate an individual. There's also a note here at the bottom that says the LLC name cannot be applied, or being applied for cannot be entered as the registered agent, because the LLC itself can't act as its own registered agent. So to add an individual, you'd click Create Registered Agent. And again, I'm using my information, and this is just for purposes of an example only, and none of the viewers have any permission to use this information to form or to designate their registered agent. And if you put in your zip code, so as you're seeing too, I filled in my name at the top box on just the lines that had an asterisk. Those are required. There's other information that you can fill in that's not required. And again, it's going to be a public record if you do enter in, for example, like an email address or phone. When I come down to the registered agent physical address, if I put in the zip code, the street address and the zip code, it'll pre-populate the city, or you can type it in. And then at the bottom for the registered agent's mailing address, if I check this box right here that says same as physical address, it'll pre-populate what I have above, or you can type in a different mailing address here. And again, just being mindful of those asterisks of where information is required. So then when you're done, you'll click Create Agent at the bottom. And it'll show right here the registered agent information that you've included. The next box down says entity address and contact information. Again, this is not required. It's an email address and phone. Or I guess I should mention too, if you want to instead add an entity at the top, you would just toggle the entity name, and you could search by, this is to designate an entity to serve as registered agent instead of an individual. You can type in the entity name here or the business ID and search within the Secretary of State's records and actually pull and link that entity directly to the one you're forming. Okay, so moving down the page, then you need to include a principal place of business anywhere for the LLC. Again, you can check this box that says same as registered agent physical address if that's what's accurate, and it'll pre-populate, or you can type an address into these fields. Again, same thing for mailing address. You can select this box right here, same as, and I can say registered agent physical address, and it'll pre-populate for me. Or you can designate another mailing address. And reminding you again that all of this information is public record. So anything that you input here will be seen by the public. The asterisks are showing you what's required at a minimum. Once you're done, you click continue in the bottom right. And then it brings you to the page that says manager information and member information. And these are two elections that the election alone is the only thing that's required that you complete in order to form an LLC. So the yes or the no is all that's required. And I'll explain a little bit more of what these are getting towards, but there are buttons over on the side that say add manager, add member. Adding this information for whomever might be serving as a manager or whomever might be a member of the LLC, that information is not required. All that's required is that you select a yes or no for each of these questions. So the first question says, the management of the limited liability company is vested to any extent in a manager. The second statement is the limited liability company may carry on its business and affairs as a single member limited liability company. So I'll explain a little bit more what these are getting at. What they're asking is it sort of goes towards the structure and operations of the LLC. You can structure an LLC in multiple ways. You can structure it as a single member LLC, which sometimes has certain benefits, or you can structure it as a multi-member LLC. If you have investors involved at all in forming a multi-member LLC, or if that's sort of the scenario or setup, structure, and operations you're anticipating, we recommend that you seek legal advice from an attorney who specializes in securities law. And then, so you can structure it, the members of the LLC can be owners, or an owner. If you're an owner, you are a member of the LLC. And so you can be member managed, which means that you're not going to hire a third-party manager to manage the LLC. To sort of contrast with that, you can also be manager managed, which means that you're hiring potentially a third party who is going to be an employee potentially of the LLC and who has certain authority to act as the manager of the LLC. An example of hiring a third party would be someone that you're hiring as an employee to be the manager versus, say, hiring or contracting with a vendor to do your bookkeeping, who's not going to be an employee and they're not going to have authority to be the manager. That'd be a situation, that last one with the bookkeeper, that's not a situation where you're managed or managed. This distinction's really important. And the other thing too is that you can designate officers from the members or including the manager, and all to say that it is a best practice and our recommendation that you have an operating agreement that specifically sets out how you are going to actually operate and run the business, and to designate all of these things, to identify who are the members, who are the managers, if anyone's a manager, who is authorized to take other actions if you don't have a manager but you have officers, meetings. I'll talk a little bit more about the operating agreement later, but it's just a really important piece to include and to have an operating agreement drafted that matches how you're doing business and how you're structured. So back to these questions. Is there a manager? This means, are you manager managed? So if you're member managed, the answer is no. If you're manager managed, the answer is yes. So I'm going to say no, that we're manager managed. We're not hiring, or sorry, we're member managed. We're not hiring a member as a third party to run this LLC. And then it's asking, are you going to carry out your business as a single member LLC? And I'm going to click yes, just for purposes of an example. Again, if you click on these buttons, you have to click yes on the manager election to open that box, that example. But for the bottom one, you can click add member. There are asterisks here, but it's sort of confusing because this is not required information. It's totally at your option. If you want to include it, it will be a public record. If you don't want to add anything, you can just click close to close that back out. And when you're ready on this page, then you'll click continue. Okay, so now you're on the last page where you need to input information in order to form and fully draft these online articles of organization. The top box says organizer information. You do have to click add organizer. It is required that you name and designate who the organizer is of the LLC. And again, this is only a one-time designation, the person who's authorized to, on behalf of the LLC, form the LLC. You can designate an entity name or an individual. And again, I'm using my information, but no one who is watching this presentation, it is for purposes of an example only, and no one is authorized or permitted to use my information or to designate me as anything for their LLC. So once you're ready with all these boxes that are completed with asterisks, you'll click Add. And it'll populate this line here under organizer information. Now, when you go across this line, there's a little box that's underneath authorized by. You have to check that box. If you don't, you're probably going to get an error later on in the system that may or may not tell you that this is what you've left out. So it's really important that you just check that box. It means that for purposes of this example, I'm authorized by the LLC to form the LLC, to act as its organizer and form it. The next box down says required, and this is true. I mentioned this at the beginning. It says signed statement of registered agent acceptance. And so it's asking you to follow this link on the click here. There's blue text that'll take you to a registered agent statement, and to fill it out and have the registered agent, whoever is serving as the LLC, to sign that statement and then to upload it. And so I'm going to show you what the statement looks like. I know this might be a smaller image, so I have the top half and the bottom half as an example. If this is the top part of this form. So in the first box, if you're designating an individual as the registered agent, you'll put that person's name in the top blue line. You can type it in once you follow the link, and then you'll put the LLC that you're forming in the second line. And then you'll print it out and you'll have your registered agent sign it, and then you'll scan it or take a picture of it, and so that you can upload it. The second box that's on this form is if you're designating an entity as your registered agent. So the person who can sign this form is the person who has authority to sign on behalf of the entity that's serving as the registered agent. So that individual's name needs to go at the top. Then you put the entity that's serving as the registered agent in that second box. And then in the third box, the LLC that you're forming. And then you print it out and have whichever individual has authority to sign on behalf of the registered agent entity, sign it, and then print it and scan it, or take a photo so that you can upload it. So for an example, and again, you won't be able to move forward with forming the LLC unless you upload something. So I'm going to do that really quickly. So I've selected the file. I hit select file and it let me browse on my computer. And then you have to click upload right next to it. And it'll show you file uploaded successfully. And you'll click OK. And then it'll show you down below where that PDF is. And you can remove it and do whatever you need to do here but make sure that you have a signed statement of acceptance uploaded before you move forward. The next box down says optional. And it just says additional articles or letter of consent. Again, unless you have a specific situation where you have another entity where the name is very similar or the same as the LLC that you're forming, if you own that entity and operate that entity, then you can upload a letter of consent that basically states that you consent to this LLC being formed with the same name because you own or use that name in another entity that you already own. That'd be an example here of when you would need to upload a letter of consent, but otherwise you don't need to upload anything else to form the LLC. You don't have to upload any type of report, any type of operating agreement. You don't need to upload anything else here. It's completely optional. And then at the bottom, it's just showing you the date that it's executed and the organizer again. So once you're done on this page, you'll click continue. And it'll bring you to the review page. And so you want to just make sure that you review everything really carefully. And this is similar to what the public will see when they search using the Secretary of State's website. This is sort of a similar format and web page of what they see. If you need to make any changes to the information here that you see, you'll click on the blue edit button that's on the top of the box that you want to change. And so you go through and you just want to double check that everything you've entered is accurate. You can see a lot of blanks because for this example, I showed sort of the minimum amount of information that you need to require. And so this is what the public would be seeing too. There's no business purpose that's been designated. There's no phone number or email address that's been designated. It's just pretty bare minimum information that's been required for this example. And when you're ready, when everything looks okay, or you've edited what you need to, you'll click OK at the bottom, or sorry, continue at the bottom. And it'll bring you to the payment page. And so at the top, it defaults with I wish to pay by e-check, which could be complicated. If you've prepaid, you'll click instead, I wish to pay by prepaid account. And once you've clicked that option, and as long as you've preloaded your account and you have your prepaid account balance right here, it's telling me it's 0 because I don't have anything in there. But when you've prepaid, you'll click pay securely using my prepaid account. And then you'll get another drop down from the top that is asking you to confirm that you want to for sure process that payment. And you'll click done, or you'll click OK or continue, whatever you need to do to, show that, that drop down that you do for sure want to confirm payment. And so, since I don't have any funds in there, I'll show you what the next screen will look like after you pay and click through that drop down or that pop-up that comes up. The next screen that you'll see is something that looks like this, which the entity name isn't quite what I started out with because I had example LLC / DBA MMH LLC. But for purposes of an example, this is just showing you what that next page will look like. And you have 2 buttons at the bottom. One says print receipt. One says print filing output, which I recommend you do both. You click both and it should download a document or put a download from your internet browser of those, because the print receipt, it may or may not show you including the filing fee, which I can show you how to get to receipts later. But the print filing output, that immediately gives you the online articles that you just formed. So it shows you what you've just submitted to the Secretary of State, what you've just completed. And those serve as your articles of organization for your LLC. So you can print them now. And then once you've clicked both of those and downloaded those documents, then you can click done. And it will likely take you back to the dashboard. And so at this stage, you've submitted your articles of organization for review to the Secretary of State. And so I'm going to pretend like I'm clicking done or I'm clicking dashboard. You do want to make sure that you've clicked through everything before you click dashboard to avoid losing your work. Like make sure you're actually at that screen, you've paid everything before you click dashboard. But once you do have a submitted entity, there will be a bit of a delay while the Secretary of State reviews everything. And so once you get an email that says that your LLC has been approved and formed, it'll say that your certificate of organization is ready to be viewed and downloaded. And you can go to the certificates icon here and click on that and access your certificate. Again, that's going to show your business ID number with the Secretary of State, which you can use for purposes of updating and linking other accounts for other agencies. And then the online submissions and the receipts is where you can find your online articles of organization. If for some reason you need to access those again, receipts, this might be where your receipt that includes the processing fee, the $1.95 extra that they charge. So these 3 buttons are where you can find the documents after you've formed your LLC and it's been approved. So the Modest Means Helpline does not specialize in tax law, and we don't give tax advice. We recommend that you seek advice from a tax attorney or a tax advisor, like a CPA, as to what type of business entity in general might be most beneficial to you or recommended from a tax perspective. if that's an LLC or otherwise. And if it's an LLC, and once you formed on the Secretary of State, that tax advisor would also be able to tell you whether you need an FEIN number through the IRS. Sometimes you can use other numbers for that, but that tax advisor should be able to help you understand if you need a separate number or if you need to apply for one through the IRS. So another good question to ask your tax advisor. After you formed your LLC, again, it is a recommended best practice, strongly recommended best practice, that you have an operating agreement drafted. Otherwise, the state statutes, the New Mexico state statutes, are the default, and just don't go into as much detail as an operating agreement can, or they may not be the most advantageous to you and your circumstances of how you operate the business. You can have a private attorney draft an operating agreement. You can also get online and try to find attorneys or firms who have operating agreement generators or drafting programs that that you can use for a flat fee. Those do exist in New Mexico, so that could be another option to you. But it could be beneficial to hire a private attorney who from the very beginning, who's aware and can also further guide you in forming the LLC, doing an operating agreement, any other agreements that you might need for the business that you're running, or waivers, anything. It's another best practice to have another set of eyes, legal eyes on everything. So, and again, once you have one drafted, you don't need to file it with the Secretary of State. It's a private internal document for the LLC. If you need to file articles of amendment, like I mentioned before, for any reason, if you need to amend any of the information that you've included in the articles of organization that you've filed with the LLC, for example, then you can use the Secretary of State's website under business maintenance. I'll show you where that is. We'll go back to, this was my leftover business search. And actually, well, yeah, I'll show you for now. If you click on, this was one of the examples before. Again, I don't know these LLCs, but it shows you what the public can see if you click on one of these records. And it is very similar to that formation, that kind of final formation page. You can see all the information that they've provided that's public record, including member information. That's not required, but here they've provided it to the Secretary of State. So when you want to go to use or to utilize to do some type of business maintenance action, you go to the business services tab, and then you hover over business maintenance, and the first option is domestic limited liability company. And then it has various documents that you need at this time to submit in paper to the Secretary of State. You can't upload or otherwise submit these to the Secretary of State using the business portal. So for example, articles of amendment, the Secretary of State gives you a little checklist of what you need when you're filing these. There's an additional filing fee of $50 to file an article of amendment or articles of amendment. You can change multiple things. At the top, you put in your LLC name, the current LLC name. Again, if there are no asterisks, you do not need to fill in this information. You just put the date when the original articles were filed. And then in this bottom box, you can include like a DBA name if you didn't register it the first time, or if you already have a formed LLC and you need to register that now, or if you need to update or change any of the other information in the articles that you formed, you can put that in this box here and then sign it. It needs to be signed by a member or manager of the LLC, so by a person who's authorized to sign. And then you can actually file by email. Or choose to be, or no, you can't file by email, but it looks like you can be notified, or the documents that you submit and that are reissued by the Secretary of State, those can be emailed to you, or you can choose to pick up your documents. But you would be able to mail to the Secretary of State or drop off in person at this address at the bottom in Santa Fe. Okay, so that's an example of using that business maintenance tab or that web page on the Secretary of State's website. Other recommended best practices. Once you formed your LLC, we recommend that you update all accounts and contracts after you formed with your new LLC name and or your DBA name, if that's what your circumstances might be. What I meant to mention also before is that you don't have to designate a DBA name. It can, if you're going to do business as the LLC that you're forming, you don't need to include an additional designation of a DBA name or include that at all. You would just put example space LLC. So updating accounts and contracts. If you're doing business in New Mexico, you're likely going to have a New Mexico Taxation and Revenue Department account to report your taxes. You might have other accounts with other agencies. So you want to update all of these with the new name of the LLC as soon as possible after you form. Update your insurance policies, contracts, leases, etc. Update your business license. You won't need a separate business license for an LLC and for the DBA. You will only need one business license per entity, or both of those can use the same business license. But you do want to keep that up to date as well. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to our helpline. Here's my contact information and the helpline's main phone number again, 505-797-6013. And thanks again for attending and watching our webinar today.